Every day when I'm breathing, it's for us to go farther, you know? Every time I speak, I want the truth to come out. You know what I'm saying? Every time I speak, I want to shiver. You know, I don't want them to be like, they know what I'm going to say because it's polite. They know what I'm going to say. And even if I get in trouble, you know what I'm saying? Ain't that what we're supposed to do? I'm not saying I'm going to rule the world or I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world. And that's our job, is to spark somebody else watching us. We might not be the ones, but let's not be selfish, and because we're not going to change the world, let's not talk about how we should change it. I don't know how to change it, but I know if I keep talking about how dirty it is out here, somebody going to clean it up.
And now he's been promoted. His job, principal.
What's going on, everyone? This is Uche Njoku. Welcome to the Sneaky Principal Podcast. It is Sunday night, 10 p.m. And if you're joining me right now, thank you so much. I just want to make sure everything here is working right and my audio is working. And let me minimize the screen. Excuse me. Let me minimize some screens here. So one of the hardest things about, it's not that hard actually, but it's one of the more complicated things about podcasting is making sure that all your instrumentations are working appropriately and you don't have any weird software popping up on you. That's the hard part. But outside of that, turn the camera on, you start talking, you know. So this evening, actually I did announce it as a podcast, as the Sneaky Principal Podcast, which it still is. However, this series in the podcast I'm calling Office Hours. I am attempting to do something interesting, where I just mainly focus on the work of being a principal. It's interesting. I keep saying it's interesting. I need to find another word. It's quite not interesting, but I'm trying to find another word. You would think as an educator I would be able to just command words drop out of the hat, but I'm gonna let me tell you why I'm doing this whole thing around this office hours. So I'm reading the definitive autobiography of Anthony Bourdain. His show Parts Unknown were always just so cool to me on CNN. I'd watch the shows and I felt like I was getting a chance to travel around the world. Being someone who grew up, who was born in another country and spent the earliest parts of my life traveling with my parents, because my mother was a diplomat. She was personal secretary to the Nigerian ambassador to Saudi Arabia. My father was a student in Saudi Arabia. So we were able to do some traveling around the Middle East and to Europe and places like that as a child. And as I got older, those opportunities became more and more limited. So having lived in here in America, and I have done a little bit of traveling in my adult life, but not as much as I would want to. I've gotten stuck in this space of just kind of the day-to-day mill of just living and working. So watching a show like Parts Unknown with Anthony Bourdain was always interesting. Plus also the fact that I'm a foodie. I love food. I love, I am no chef by any means, but I do enjoy partaking in chefing and trying to create interesting dishes and things of that nature. But the way he would connect that experience of cooking and food with cultures around the world was always amazing to me. As you guys know, he passed away a few years back, and it was super unexpected and so unfortunate. He took his own life, and a lot of conversations are still being held to this day about what really happened. But beyond that, this book that I'm reading, his definitive autobiography, the definitive biography, it's just written about him, and it's a compilation of conversations with all these people who knew him. And it's in reading that book that an interest was sparked to me about one of his earlier books. I think his first book, Kitchen Confidential, which I've always been aware of that book, but never had an interest of reading it. So now I'm like, okay, now I got to read this book, because everyone keeps referring to how that book was the pivotal moment in his career as a chef. But one thing I love about this book is the title, The Kitchen Confidential, and it's like the adventures of blah, 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 cooking, kitchens, whatever. But it made me think about, actually, let me not do that. Let me give it its appropriate title. Hold up. I don't have a personal assistant, so I have to kind of like look up things myself. Kitchen Confidential. Okay. So the book is titled, his book is titled Kitchen Confidential. And the subtitle is, I'm trying to find, here we go. Is it this? Kitchen Confidential, and the subtitle is Adventures in the Culinary Underbelly. So it made me think about, and plus not only that, I started reading that book too. So I'm reading both books at the same time. And in the preface, he talks about it, because I have the re-release edition where he kind of writes the preface himself, years down the road and he's talking about why he wrote the book. And in there he talks about how he wanted to write a book. He wanted to write a definitive book about, let me take that back, not definitive. He was pretty much writing a rant/memoir of him as a chef, as a cook in New York City, and all the things about that lifestyle. But he wasn't writing the book for the layman, like the normal person out there who goes to the kitchens and goes to restaurants. He's writing a book that people who work in restaurants, chefs and all the people who are all through that, cooks and servers and people who are part of that culture could understand. So he's writing a story for them. And it made me wonder, why isn't there a book about education, urban education, from the perspective of an educator talking to other educators? But usually you have books that are more professional development for the purpose of just kind of like telling you about how to be as an educator, and but nothing really talking about the real experiences, the day-to-day, the language, the emotions and things of that nature. So it just had me thinking about that. And then all of a sudden I was like, I'm going to go live and I'm going to create this new content. I'm not sure if this is going to be, how often it's going to be, but this content is going to be about just talking about what it's like, and not even what it's like, about the experiences that educators go through, and not just school leaders. I am a principal, but at the core of who I am an educator. I am a teacher. It just so happens that right now my primary responsibility is to be the lead teacher of a school, to be the one who is making sure the school is meeting its mission, vision, and all those good things, and really leading teachers. But at the core, I am a teacher, and there's a lot of things that happens in our space that is that if you're on the outside you wouldn't know. A lot of things emotionally, a lot of things in the craft of teaching that is just something that people just don't understand. People just, what you hear from people is this. When you tell people you're a teacher, this the typical responses. God bless your heart, I couldn't do what you do. Oh my God, so amazing to have people like you who are willing to really work with our children. Okay. You get also, you are so lucky. You only work 6.5 hour day, and only that you have the summers off. And the reality of a lot of this is not true. I can tell you this, in my whole entire career as an educator, and there's some people out there who are able to manage the system and be able to have their summers off. I get my 2-week vacations, but I can tell you, even as a teacher, I worked all year round. I worked summer school. The pay, of course, as a teacher is depending, even regardless of where you live, because it all balances out based on where you live. It's not like a high-paying job. So a lot of teachers end up having other jobs, or they continue working in schools over the summer, teaching summer school, things of that nature, to just make ends meet. So, yes, education, school, teaching has a structure that looks like it's like such a much easier day. It's not a 9 to 5. But it's not true, because if you think about it, schools were created around serving society. There's a reason why you have summers off, because a lot of places that's the harvest time. So school wasn't happening the whole entire year, but you needed those 2 months to really work the farms and things of that nature. Because once upon a time, this country was really based on an agricultural economic system. So we still hold on to that to this day, and I think one of the reasons it's like that is also the fact that you can curb the pay you pay teachers. If you have to pay them all year round for everyone, that makes a huge shift in the economics of society, especially when it comes to schools. But then not only that now, even the working school day. Think about it this way: most schools, actually not in most schools, most teachers in America, 80% of teachers are women. Actually more than 80%. I know 80% are roughly white women, but if you add everyone together, is vast majority of teachers are women. And kind of hard to, you have to understand the mentality of what schools are structured. You had to create a system where these women can make it home in time to be able to address their other duties. And again, I'm saying this based on historical context. So you had a shorter work day for school so that you can get home to your children, to prepare for your husband, and whatever it is that was required of you. And this has nothing to, and please, anyone who's listening to this, I'm not trying to be chauvinistic and be like, yeah, women have to get home at a certain time, but that's just what the structure was. And all these things are still here till to this day. So you have a school system that, if you think about it, economically speaking, doesn't pay a full day's work. A school system that doesn't pay for a full year of work. These breaks are all in there, and it curbs how much you can pay teachers. And I might be wrong about this, but I think it makes sense. And so a lot of these things are things that you don't even think about. And then if you couple that with just the amount of work that it requires to teach a lesson, to manage a classroom, teachers are working all the time. At least good teachers are. Good school leaders are working all the time. I gotta tell you right now, if I can get a call right now, a text message right now saying X and Y is happening with a kid in a particular family. Let me give you real examples. I've gotten phone calls on a Sunday afternoon saying, hey, we just got a call that student X didn't make it home on Friday, or student X ran away Saturday night. And you would think, well, that's that family's problem. That got nothing to do with school. But no. It becomes your problem, because as a teacher, as a concerned teacher, as a school principal, that child is my child. From the moment the child walks into the school building to the end of the school day, that's my child, because I am legally responsible for that child. So, and if you're really worth your salt in this profession, your day extends beyond, or the work or your connection to your students extend beyond the school building. So you're concerned about every single child. So you might find yourself now on a Sunday afternoon calling your safety director in your school district, or whatever the case is, making sure everybody knows what to do or what's going on. So your life just keeps on. The work doesn't stop. It literally becomes part of your life. Okay, I'm looking at my comments. A comment came in here, but it's an offer to get more viewers. Listen, if I have one viewer or two viewers, it doesn't really matter to me. I know that eventually this content is going to get to where it needs to be. But so whoever this person is, thank you so much, for your interest in supporting my viewership. But so this is the thing about the work that we do that often it's not talked about. But I think it's very important. Like, there is a space for urban school confidential, the adventures in the education underbelly, so people understand the work that goes on to educating children. But also, I think by having these kinds of conversations, it forces schools and school leaders and teachers to really be on the P's and Q's about what they're doing in their spaces. And you might be like, what do you mean by that? So I'll tell you what I mean by that. It's always concerned me that there are school communities out there that are more concerned with the bottom line of meeting benchmarks that set by their districts. So whatever it's test scores, whether it's attendance or whatever the case may be, and and these things are important, but they're only worried about the numbers. They're not worried about the child themselves. They're only worried about the numbers. So when you have a school where it's all about the test score, because that test score might be tied into compensation, that test score might be tied into school's doors being open. I mean, very important. You got to keep the school doors open so you can have children in there. But when that becomes the focus, and what happens is everything that happens in that school is about hitting a number, whether it's a 5% increase, a 10% decrease for chronic absenteeism. When all these things are happening and there's an absence of concern for what's happening with the child, and understanding what the child's needs are, then you go into a very dark place. I'll give an example. As a first year principal, I remember two numbers that were two numbers, generally two numbers that I was called out on consistently. And this is years back. First thing was attendance. Attendance. I was at a school that at that point in time was arguably the worst middle school in the Bronx. At least that's what I was told. And there was data to support that. And attendance was atrocious. It was a community school, it was a neighborhood school. Kids were in the neighborhood, but they weren't showing up. And we worked very hard, with the attendance teachers, home visits, and all that to get those numbers up. And those numbers increased, but it was such a focus about being in school, to the point where kids would show up and I would admonish them for being absent. What are you doing? Don't you know how important your attendance is? But I wasn't speaking from the perspective of why attendance was important for that child's future and everything. I was speaking from the perspective of attendance being important for me and my job and making sure I met these numbers so I can get a good rating for the year. As a first year principal, I did not want to be put in a position where all of a sudden, look at you, your first year principal, we give you an opportunity and your attendance is so horrible and all these things. I didn't want that to be the case. And I remember there was this young man who, of course, attendance issue. He showed up at school, and this is after we'd gone back and forth. He would come to school, then he wouldn't come, and all these different things. And one day I was like, listen, what's going on? We're doing all these things for you, incentives and everything to get you to school, and you're not showing up. Like, what's going on here? Like, don't you care about your future? And I was reading him the riot act. And the young man just stood there. And this is a kid who could easily be combustible, but he just stood there, and he was quiet looking. And he had this pensive look on his face. Then he just looked at me and he just said, Mr. Njoku, my feet hurt. And when he said that, my feet hurt, I was like, this smart Alex, something to myself, maybe he's talking about walking to school or whatever the case may be, his feet hurt. And I was like, what? He's like, mister, my shoes are too small. My mom's just trying to work to get enough money to buy me some new sneakers, but, this is all I have. And the funny thing was, for me, it didn't really dawn on me, or it didn't hit me, that this young man, over the course of that school year, I think he was in the seventh grade at the time, I think he was in seventh grade, had probably grown since the beginning of the school year a good 2 inches. And right now, he's that's my son, he's literally towering over me. But back then, he was like taller than me. And also, I didn't account for in the space of only worrying about the number, meeting that number, and I didn't account for the fact about all the root causes. Like, that wasn't the conversation I was having. It was really about getting those numbers up. So I wasn't sitting in the space of thinking about root causes. What was causing kids to not show up to school? And the fact that, I think at that point in time, my average payroll for my teachers in that school was something like about, I want to say about $70,000 a year. But we were serving a community where the average household income was about $24,000 a year. I'm talking about average household income, $24,000 a year, regardless of the number of children or members of that family. And here's a young man telling me, I have not been coming to school because the shoes that I have to wear to get to school are too small. I've outgrown them and my feet hurt. When I say to you that the moment he said that, it dawned on me, the moment I really heard him, I had to fight back like tears. I had to fight back the emotions that was welling up in me, because at that moment in time, I realized I was being a butthole. I was not doing the work that I believed I was there to do, which was educate the whole child, which requires that I am intentional about supporting the child, the families, making sure they have everything they need to be successful. This young man needed shoes. And I was so concerned about the numbers. Because if I had really spent the time to really talk to him and ask him like what was happening, maybe I would have found out the need. And the fact of the matter is, at school, I've always been good at managing resources, and I know for a fact the resource to get those shoes were there. And if they weren't, I would have gone through my own personal sneaker collection and given them something, and it's those moments. And yes, he was taken care of, and the fact of the matter, he came to school. Was his attendance perfect? No, it wasn't perfect, but it was better than it was before. And I think addressing that need didn't not only, stopped his feet from hurting, but allowed him to know. It gave him evidence that his school community, his school, his teachers, his principal, everyone here we were all behind his success. We were all there for him, to support him and make sure that he would graduate and be successful. And since then, he has graduated from high school. He's doing his thing. But that moment, that comment, my feet hurt, changed the way I led, and made me less concerned about the numbers. And yes, I still work hard behind those numbers, but the way I do it is different. The way I do it is different. I call on my guidance counselors to try to figure out what's really going on in those households. When the child's not coming to school, what's going on? What's the root cause? What's the underlying issue that we're not seeing? And rarely is it where it's just like this kid and this family just doesn't care. And yes, I've come across those situations. But even in those situations, it's a reason that not caring, that laissez-faire attitude around, getting your child to school, getting a child coming to school. There's still always another layer of root causes that we can dig deeper to understand. And I tell you, once you find out what that is, all of a sudden, there is a shift that happens. Not all the time, but majority of the time, the shift that happens. And I can say the same thing about test scores, and things like and things like that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you another one. So recently, I had a meeting with a bunch of my students in student government, and a question came up. And again, when we talk about the things that we don't think about, about that happens in schools. So I'm a big believer in giving students a voice. Like, what I mean by that is asking the question: how are we doing? Creating space for students to really express themselves, without penalty. I mean, there should never be penalty. I mean, if you go to McDonald's and you ask for a cheeseburger and they give you a fish sandwich, you don't get penalized by saying, "Hey, there's an error here made. Can I get the appropriate sandwich?" No, they apologize and give you a new sandwich. I believe that should be the same way in schools. And I remember, just the other week, I think it was last week actually, I had a student who asked during my meeting with the student government executive board, and the question was, how come every classroom feels the same and teachers teach the same way? And I was like, what do you mean by that? They were like, it doesn't matter if it's English or science or a foreign language, social studies, it's taught the same way. So I was like, wait a minute, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And I think I knew what they were trying to get at. But this is one of the issues that I've been trying to get a better grasp on. And they were saying that like the way the lessons unfolded, what happens in the activities, all those things are all the same. And I asked the question, so what would you want it to look like? And the response was, you could teach the same subject, but make connections to the real world and let us know why this thing is important so that we can make better decisions as we go into the real world, because we've had the time to quickly think about things and analyze things and talk about things and not only learn the content, but also walk away with skills that we can apply in real time in the real world. I was like, from the mouth of babes. Because one of the issues that we've had in schools for a very, very long time, and it's slightly shifting, but it's still going to take a while, is the fact that if you are going through an education program right now to become a teacher right now, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or in my case, 16 going on 17 years ago, it's the same curriculum. It's the same methodology. Yes, now you're going to add a little bit of technology to it, but the thought process is still the same. We do this workshop model where we have the standard, which is the foundation of everything we do, the standard. And then based on that standard, we create a lesson that meets the mastery of that standard. And we do the mini lesson, we do the, I do, we do, and you do with a partner and then you do independently. And it's all about the process of doing. But very little room is left for, very little room is created as far as the space for critically analyzing and unpacking and making meaning of and breaking something down to its smallest denominators. That's something that's not often done. And when it's done, it's amazing. It's amazing. But I can tell you why it's not always done. It's not always done because if you're teaching in a typical school setting, you have a 45-minute block. If you're teaching in a typical urban school setting, you might have 25 to 30 kids in your classroom. In some places, even more. So in the midst of trying to manage personalities and get kids to work and get kids on task, and then address all the different levels of understanding in your classroom or in the classroom, time is flying. And there's very few teachers who are able to control time, or better yet, slow it down, where by the end of the lesson, that 45 minutes, students walk away with like multiple aha moments. That is something that is not typical. And I would even say it's not even that it's not typical. It's it doesn't happen. It rarely happens where you have consistently an engagement of students in a way that really grasps them every single day. Because again, the teacher pool is getting younger and younger. A lot of people are retiring or have retired, and the pandemic didn't make things any easier. So you have new teachers who are coming in who are deficient in skill, and a lot of the skill that's needed it comes with experience and time, and having taught a particular content over and over again, until the point where you know it so well that you could not play with it and extend it and have it take so many different forms to engage your students. So this is something again that's a struggle, and why this is important is because the child is asking this question, and this child who's asking this question is a junior, but then another student who's a senior kind of piggybacked on it and said, "Hey, I'm about to graduate, and maybe I might not be ready, but I don't think I've been really pushed to think, really in all my subject areas." And I know this is not an issue that's unique to my school. It's an issue that is real across many schools across the country, especially urban schools. Because when you're dealing with overcrowding, when you're dealing with a younger teacher pool, when you're dealing with all the distractions that happens in the classrooms and even the school and the community, it gets very hard to create a consistently intellectually engaging space every day. Especially not just every day in one subject, every day across 7 subjects. Like my school, my kids, I take 7 classes every day, every semester. So as a result, you're trying to maximize and create that same level of engagement across all these subjects every single day. The brain only has but so much capacity. But again, these are things that need to happen for them to be able to meet their graduation requirements, to get the high school diploma and go to college. But there's always that fear that we're not doing enough. I'll tell you, it keeps me up at night. This year at my school, we decided to go all out, college board, meaning that our underclassmen, 9th and 10th grades, will be taking primarily pre-AP courses to build the foundational skills that they need to go into AP courses, mostly their upper class years, junior, senior year. And that was done because of the fact, looking at data, and how kids were performing and without the foundational skills, and go straight into AP course. That took hours of looking at data and talking to my team and seeing what are the options, what can we do, how do we fix this issue with these low scores, because, and again, things that people don't even understand, and often even teachers who work in your school might not understand. They're like, okay, why did you change these things? And they try to explain to them the data and the numbers and all those different things, and trying to say, like, this is what's going to be best for our kids, to make sure that they have the foundational skills, and then we can push them. But then even with that all, we still are dealing with the same methodology of teaching, and here we have kids who are asking, like, why does it have to be like this? How can we, expand that space so that we can really have classrooms where we're fully engaged? That's a tough. I'm not gonna sit here and I don't want to lie to you and be like, that's something that's easily resolved. It's not. You're constantly going back to the drawing board. I constantly go back to the drawing board and ask myself, okay, is this working? Right now, I can tell you this: like the shift we've made to college board at my school this year, it's I'm seeing early fruits be yielding, but I won't know until I see test scores. And I know I said about test scores earlier, but for me, test scores is not just about the number. It's about which students, male, female, Black, Latino, Asian, white, what are their baseline data saying about them, how they should have performed. What were all the formative assessments that we give the kids so we can predict how they're doing, what support we're giving to students. Like, all these things now kind of like get blended in together, and I try to kind of like, take apart the numbers and try to see a pattern and say, okay, based on these patterns, these are the shifts we need to make. Something that's not seen. People think kids just go to school and they go the first period, they go take class and they take a quiz and that's it, And there are a lot of schools out there that's the case. That's what happens. But at my school, I shy away from that. I really do shy away from that because it's so much deeper. We have to go much deeper, and what that means is understanding the child. Who is the child? Who are we talking about? What are their needs? Just like the young man whose feet hurt. If I had done a better job at going deeper and understand what the needs were, then I wouldn't have had the embarrassing conversation of admonishing him for not being in school without knowing what his need is. The same thing happens in the classroom. Everything that we do instructionally, we also have to do root cause analysis. What's going on? Listen, the number of times that we are thinking a child just doesn't want to do the work, that a child is being lazy, until we find out randomly that this child is homeless, that we found out randomly this child has suffered a tremendous loss. We found out randomly, that this child has been put on the path of failure for years, and no one has taken out the time to really engage and support this child's need over a period of years. So by the time somebody's really looking at them, and it's almost like we have to now peel back years of abuse, academic abuse, and that's a real thing. academic abuse. Check this out. I've always thought it's funny when I have a student, not funny, but really depressing, when I have a student who, when I meet them, I talk to them, I engage with them, and I'm like, whoa, this young man is intelligent. Actually, this young man is like mental smart. This young man has stats and numbers. Could tell you about every receiver stats in the New York Giants for the past 20 years. Like literally, I had a student like that. But then you go into a math class and this child is struggling. And then you let me look at his test scores. You look at the test scores for years and you realize that second and third grade, they were really good at math. Something happened fourth grade year. And from that point, the numbers just went like down the toilet. But then you find out, fourth grade year, this young man's father was murdered. And school he just never recovered. And the academic abuse is what was done to really support his needs as soon as possible. What conditions were set for this young man to be able to catch up and get supports, so that he would continue on a trend of being great at math. And often what happens is that, the child comes and we baby them and we're like, sorry. You don't have to do this work, you don't have to do that. And before you know it, it becomes normalized for them that, I don't have to do the work. Then when we try to get them to do the work, and it's a battle now. It's like pulling teeth. And all of a sudden, it becomes a habit. I think I already said it becomes a habit. And now you're like, how do we break this child of this habit? And even worse, if you have teachers who are just like, who have the mentality of, if he doesn't want to do the work, that's his problem. And before you know it, here's a young man in high school and can barely get past algebra after taking the Regents 4 or 5 times. For those of you who are in New York State, I'm talking about the Regents Exams or standardized testing that's required of all high school students to show mastery or level of mastery in content areas. And all this happens so often. But again, people don't understand about it. Don't understand that space. I'll tell you this: that young man I was telling you about who was like he was literally a New York Giants savant. And what I'll share with you, this young man, I'll just let you know, did go to college, did graduate. I followed him via social media for a number of years. I've lost contact since then. So if you see this, you will know I'm talking about you. It's funny because when I found out the tragedy that was this young man's life, I wanted to know more about him. And I found out his love for sports and stats came from his father. His father just loved New York City sports. So he followed suit with his dad. I remember just thinking to myself, like, wow, how many people have judged this young man without knowing what he went through? The huge, tremendous loss. The most important person in his life, he lost. The person he most mimics, he lost. And I remember, him and I having a conversation. And that period of time, I had a good friend of mine who played for the Giants, for the New York Giants, and I called him. I called him and asked him to do me a favor. Like, hey, there's a kid here who's a huge Giants fan, and not only that, he knows all your stats. And this friend of mine was a linebacker, and he was like, how? I'm like, no, he knows. Not only does he know your stats, he knows everybody's stats on that team, and he can go back a couple of years. So he was fascinated, and we met up at the Princeton Club with the young man. Of course, I called his mom and said, hey, I want to do this for him. And mom was like, thank you so much. We went out to the Princeton Club. We sat there, and he met, this New York Giant. And when I say I've never seen a athlete who the fan knew the stats better than the athlete who actually performed and earned those numbers. It was incredible. And to the point where I remember he asked him a question about a game, and he went to the game and said, hey, during this game, during this quarter, why did you do this? And I think it was an audible was called, and the question was like, why did you make that decision when the audible was called? And the friend of mine looked at me and looked at this kid and was like, okay, this kid's a 10th grader, right? I think he was a 10th or 11th grade. He was like, how do you remember that? Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. And the kid had to walk him through. He was like, wow, how do you know that? You know? And again, the things about what we do as educators that people just wouldn't understand, because there's such a variety of experiences that happens in the school building, and the kids and the teachers, and you know, and it's funny because some people might be like, why did you even set that? I did it because I felt maybe I was wrong. That young man needed it. He needed it. I know he needed it. You know, maybe he didn't realize he needed it. But I just, in my mind, thought to myself, you know, and I'm a spiritual person, so I thought to myself, him sitting there with this New York Giant football player, and I believe his father was probably right there, you know, in our midst, looking at his son saying, hey, look at where you're at right now. The thing that we loved together has brought you to a space now where you get to share a meal with somebody whose work drives our passion. And for me, sitting there with that young man and my friend who played for the Giants, you know, was great because it was a reflection of my passion as an educator, you know, to inspire and to really motivate young people. And again, the young man graduated. He graduated, and last month I believe he was studying finance. I might be wrong about that, but he went to college, and I think that was worth the hella expensive burger from the Princeton Club. But again, this is what we do, and this is what people don't realize that we do on a daily basis as educators. So, but yeah. I'm going to do a quick time check. It is 11:42, and I am going to say this. So for those of you who are either listen to this live or might come across this video, I'm going to try to do this at least. It's hard to really committing to a time frame right now. It's just tough, you know. But I'm going to try to do this at least once a month, maybe twice a month, and where I just do office hours. And if you're able to catch me, a great time for us to engage in the conversation. I may ask you questions, or whatever the case may be. Again, this is a profession that there isn't a lot of transparency as far as what we do. And I think if school principals were more transparent, or we were allowed to be more transparent, you know, we can really benefit our families and our communities even more, because at the end of the day, we are tasked. We're being given this incredible task of really leading buildings of teachers and staff and cafeteria workers and bus drivers to ensure that our children are being prepared for the world. Because literally, one of those kids is going to end up having my job. One of those kids is going to be the next Anthony Bourdain, and one of those kids is going to be a lawyer, doctor, you know, and a linebacker for the New York Giants. And they all have to go through school buildings. So demystifying what happens in the building is very, very important, because I think if we demystify it and have people understand what it entails, I think creating community support and community cohesion and making sure our schools are great will be so much easier. So I'll say this. With that being said, please like, subscribe, share, click on that bell so whenever I post, you get, or even go live, you get that notification. I appreciate you viewing, and whether you're viewing live or you're catching this on a replay. Again, this is Uche Njoku, sneaker principal, a proud New York City principal in Brooklyn. And see you guys soon, all right? Have a good night.
And now he's been promoted. His job, principal.
Let's see it.